Okay, so let's pick up at that last example that we went through to talk about comparing the mean to the median. So in this example, you could see that there's a pretty big difference between the median and the mean. The mean is likely to be so high because of you have a few observations that are very high, like the 65, the 85, and even those 260s. So, because of those observations, we would view this graph as being slightly skewed to the right. So that idea of it being skewed to the right, it pulled up your mean. Whereas with the median is not going to move depending on how big or how small the numbers get. The median is the middle. So it would only change if you started to add or take away observations. Other than that, it's pretty resistant. So what we see is that the median is resistant where the mean is not. The mean is going to, it'll chase a tail end, okay? So it'll either chase a single observation upward or it'll even chase a really far downward observation if it was left skewed, okay? So it's very important to understand the idea of the average versus the typical value. Okay, so the median quite often describes the typical value. So the typical travel time in New York is 22.5, different than the average of the value. Okay. So when the mean and the median of a roughly symmetric distribution would be found, that they should be pretty close together. So if it's roughly symmetric, they should be around the same number. They won't be perfect. So if you were talking about the North Carolina travel times, the mean was 20. The median was 20, and the mean was 22.5. They're pretty close together. That's because that was roughly symmetric. You had a little bit of a tail end there, but not as significant with the New York travel times. If they were exactly symmetric, which isn't likely to happen that you would see this, but if it were, the mean and the median are exactly the same. Okay, and just like I showed you with the New York one, in a skewed distribution, the mean is usually farther out in the long tail than the median would be. Okay, so depending on if it's skewed left or right, the mean would follow. It would follow a tail end where the median wouldn't. Okay, so let's just talk about should we choose the mean or the median as a description for our center. You're not going to want to pick both. You're going to pick just one or the other. Often it would depend on the situation. I would say that the mean is probably more common in any situation, definitely in our course, but that doesn't mean that it's always the best. If you are talking about college tuitions, maybe home prices, people's personal incomes, okay, all of these things, they're skewed to the right, right? Because you have, think of the 1% for your personal incomes, right? They were all the way out there. The rest of the country is far from them in a main cluster towards the left, right? So the mean will be brought up by that right tail end, right? So if you were wanting to find a center for personal incomes, that would be more like the typical income or personal incomes in the U.S. Probably would paint a more realistic picture than the mean would, okay? Those 1%ers, they're going to bring up their average, their value is going to bring up what the mean is. So it may not be the best. The median perhaps would be a more typical or realistic picture of the center of that distribution. However, if a town wanted to, say, impose a 1% tax on its residents, they would want to use the mean because it's higher. As the tax revenue will be 1% of a total income, which is the mean times the number of residents. They'll make more money if they use the mean, so they're going to pick the mean as opposed to the median. Let's run through a quick problem and move on to our spread, describing our spread. Okay, so we're going to refer back to the travel times of the New Yorkers. Okay, so we found that the median was 22.5 minutes based only on the stem plot. Would you expect the mean, the mean travel time to be less than, about the same as, or larger than the median, and why? Okay. Because the distribution is skewed to the right, we would expect the mean to be larger than the median. We already found it. So we don't have to do that. And we are correct. The mean was 31.25, so it is higher. Would the mean or median be more appropriate summary of the center of distribution of travel times? Because the distribution is skewed, I would say that the median is probably a better measure of the center of distribution. So if it's heavily skewed or skewed in one direction, the median may be a better description of your typical center of your center. And that's it for this video. Next up, we'll talk more about the spread of a distribution.